Hey, everybody, welcome back to Referee Timeout. This is known as episode 15, or better known as the Patrick Mahomes edition of Referee Timeout. I'm Mike Baumgartner, Director of Officiating for the APP Tour, and also the certified referee for USA Pickleball.
You're the certified referee for USA Pickleball. There's only one.
I didn't mean to say it that way. Sorry.
We're
There's
leaving this
plenty
in.
of us.
We're not going to redo this one at all. Okay,
There's
that.
plenty of us, and we're all equally certified. Sorry.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Hi, I'm Bob Swisshelm. I am only a, I am not the, but I am a USA Pickleball certified referee. And I'm in trouble now because I'm also one of the head refs for the APP head ref team. And I happen to report to the director of officiating. So I'm probably in trouble for making fun of him now. What are we going to talk
So
about today, Mike?
well, if you're in trouble for that, I'm in trouble with all the other certified referees out there. I'm so sorry. Anyway, hey, we're gonna in the last episode we talked about the types of penalties that can be given to you during a match and how we score those or the demerits that are associated with those and how they can accumulate. In this particular episode, we're going to talk about the nuances associated with each type of penalty, a verbal warning, a technical warning, a technical foul. So how does a referee distinguish between what they've seen and the action that they've seen and how that particular uh, penalty should apply, right? So inside of the rule book, specifically 13G1, A through whatever letter it is, there's several of them. Looks like we go all the way down to I, possibly, or even further. The it does talk about in detail what those particularly penalties are and how they can be decided upon. So, Bob?
Yeah, as you said, 13G1 talks about verbal warnings and technical warnings, and then 13G2 talks about technical fouls. And
There
so
you
we
go.
talked about the difference between either zero and one demerit or two demerits. And the point that Mike is talking about here is that we as referees study the words between G1 and G2 to help us understand, well, what's the difference between mild versus abusive or something along those lines. And that's kind of the purpose of what we're going to be talking about here is we're not going to read off that stuff, but we're going to talk about that in relationships specific things. So we've said, well, let's talk about language, let's talk about coaching, let's talk about ball abuse, let's talk about paddle throwing and how we would differentiate what we might see as a verbal warning versus a technical warning versus a technical foul relating to some of those different types of activities.
Yeah, exactly. So there are key words inside of the rule book that help us understand how the penalty should be applied or what penalty should be applied, right? So a verbal warning, objectionable language, versus technical warning, which could be extreme objectionable language, or a technical foul could be that. So there are key words in there that help us understand exactly how the penalty should be applied based off of the referee's threshold, right? So one referee may see it as extreme, while another referee may not.
Correct. And we talk about this a lot in the ref tent, which is either actually in the ref tent at the tournaments or on Zoom calls that we hold. And one of the things that we try to train referees is to help them understand their own personal thresholds for that and to make it fair and not to apply your own personal bias. Having said that, it is very personal. I I will find, and in many cases, referees don't find the language itself as being objectionable or whatever, because you hear this outside all the time, right? Or you may use it yourself, and so there's that question, and trying not to let your own personal objection to it flavor it. But then there's the concept of what is allowed and what is appropriate, and the rule book will say things about not allowing language that isn't common or is not for common society. What that means to me is that I tend to allow grade school type of language, like, well, poop or darn it or crap or whatever, and those types of things. But when you start getting into the S words or the F words, those are certainly words that, although they may or may not be objectionable to me to others, but certainly on court, they are things that we tend to address.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll look at those words too, and not necessarily always what word was said, but how it was said and where it was said and who it was said to, right? So those all make a big difference when it comes to the profanity and the application of some type of foul. For instance, if somebody hits a bad shot and they turn around walking back to the baseline, getting ready for the next serve, and use the S word very quietly, I may not say anything. But if they yell it out after they've made that shot, I might go straight to a technical warning. I'll definitely give a verbal warning, but I may go to a technical warning. So it's all in understanding the circumstance behind the word and when they say it and how they say it. For me, that's my
Right,
threshold.
right. And I absolutely agree. And realize as well as players that we as referees are not out to get you. What we are out to do is to maintain control and not let these things escalate. We understand that it's a competitive environment. There's adrenaline flowing, and there needs to be a way for you to release your frustration or your excitement or whatever in a productive way. The graduation of these types of penalties allows us to set a stake in the ground to let you know when you have exceeded something. We'll talk a little bit later potentially about paddle throws, and when I have to give somebody a technical foul for a excessive paddle throw, afterwards, after I've already given it to them, I will tend to have a conversation with them. I understand that you have frustration, but you need to find a socially acceptable method for you to release that frustration. And throwing a paddle with aggressive disregard is not ever an appropriate way to deal with that.
Yeah, we can get into paddle throws a little bit more detail, but for me, it's like as soon as you let go of that paddle, you have no idea where it's going to go. Uh, Obviously, if you don't throw it as hard, it's not going to go as far, but there have been times when I've seen players throw it all the way across the court, sometimes into the bleachers. Those situations are uncalled for and should never happen.
Uh, Absolutely, absolutely. Now, we as referees, as I said, we spend a lot of time talking about this stuff. There's actually this thing called a casebook entry that helps the referee understand what is the difference between a toss and a throw, right? Mike, have you ever been on a court when somebody hits a shot, they hit it into the net, and they're extremely frustrated with themselves, and so they say timeout, and then they'll take their paddle and they will essentially toss it with a little bit of aggression to the baseline where they happen to know that they're going to be at the end of a timeout. So, but they're standing at the non-volley zone. So we're talking about, 15 to 17 feet there. And but they're tossing it under control with a little bit of aggression. What do you think about that?
To me, I'm not giving a penalty. I understand what they're doing and why they did it, and they're just tossing it to where they're going to be. So it's just a small toss out of anger. So I have to look at that and say, okay, what are all the situation behind why this person did what they did? I'm not giving a penalty for that particular type of
Right.
paddle toss.
But if they do something, say they take that ball that they just hit it into the net and they hit it into the net again, or they take the paddle that they hit the ball with and they throw it into the net, or they throw it up against a fence that where it bounces into the fence and goes somewhere, but you've got spectators on the other side of that fence. Those are different situations, right? And
Much different. Much
much,
different.
much different, much
Be-
different.
because we can pull out the words out of the rule book that say um, aggressively, right? Those are aggressive situations
Right.
or extremely aggressive
Or
situations.
disregard to the consequences, right?
Yeah,
Right.
those types of situations warrant a much larger penalty. That's for sure.
Um, it seems to me this is I'm maybe jumping ahead, but let's talk about. So I've just lost the match, and that same activity happens. So I'm extremely angry, and I take a ball and I launch it off into somewhere, or I take my paddle and I throw it off to somewhere else. But the match is over. Is there any consequence to that particular activity?
There is now, as in 20 start of 2025, you can be penalized for your upcoming next match. So let's say the match is over, you do something like that. Referee should come to you and say, I saw your action. I have to report that to the head referee. And then it goes through a process once it's brought back. And part of that process is actually talking to you as the player, understanding what you did, why you did it, and what type of direction you go with the conversation will also depend on what type of penalty that you receive for your next match. Now, understand if this is a team event, the penalty goes with the player, not necessarily both players associated to the team, if there is a penalty.
And it's interesting because we've had situations where a player is playing singles and they get extremely frustrated. They perform some activity at the
Yeah.
end of their match. They're now done in that singles event. So their next event is a mixed doubles or a gender doubles. And now they have to have a conversation with their partner, say, hey, we're coming in with our opponent's going to get 1 point because of something that I did in that last match. I'm sorry, but that's the way it works. So that we've had those
Yeah.
conversations.
So yeah, penalties can be applied after the match and they'll affect your next match regardless of what you're playing in. Some players some players on the tour have referred to this as I was put into detention. So that's
And remember what we've said in this series from the get-go is that we're not out to get you as
no, not at
players.
all. No.
However, we do. I'm a parent. Mike's a parent. Sometimes we feel like your parents on these courts, and we used to teach our kids about the concept of consequences. If you perform badly or you do something that warrants a particular penalty or consequence, then you should take your medicine, so to speak. Until
Yep.
this rule change, there was a loophole in the rules that would, if you did this bad behavior, the only thing that we could do is if it warranted a match forfeit, then we could match forfeit you on your next match. But we're not going to match forfeit you for something that would normally have been only a technical warning. So some of us actually like this rule because now it's an even, balanced, and we're closing a loophole. So now there are consequences to your actions whenever they occur on court. And so we like it. And for the most part, Mike, would you say that once we explain this to the players that have received these things, they may be a little bit surprised, but do they take it pretty well?
Yeah, for the most part, the players don't even know the rule exists. So I'm thankful that we have this platform to share that type of information with them. Yeah, they they kind of question it at first, but then they understand. And like I said in the earlier episode, it's like which direction do they go during the conversation? Do they show remorse? Do they admit to it? Do they admit to it, but they're still angry about it? Never should have happened, or they start blaming other people for their actions, things like that. And then the penalty is decided upon that conversation, honestly.
Right.
Um, and a number of other things, of course. But the interesting part of it is, let's say it's the next day. When they come out to court, a head referee will come out with the lead referee, and then the conversation will ensue as to, you're starting with a technical foul. That means blah, 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 right? And then it's all a big, people just kind of joke about it, right? They're over it basically, and they move on. So, um, there's only been a couple of times where we've applied a technical foul, and the other team gets a point to start the match. Most of the time, it's been either a verbal or a technical warning,
Right.
which, as we said in our early episode, a verbal, you have no demerits. A technical warning, you start the match with one demerit. So then you have to be on the lookout. You have to make
Right.
sure you're acting correctly.
I'd like to and actually clarify a couple things. One is that on that next day, it is extremely unlikely that the head referee will just show up and surprise that player, although they would have been
Mm,
warned by the referee beforehand. What will normally happen is that the head referee will meet with that player outside of the next match, before their next match, and have a conversation about this is what's going potentially going to happen. So
yeah,
we don't just kind of come in mass or whatever and just kind of surprise you. So the player who is bringing that penalty forward always knows before they get to court that
right.
that's going to happen. And as you said, that's relatively lighthearted in some cases. The other
Yeah,
thing is, I want to remind you of something that we said in the last episode. The purpose behind this is to help you understand the consequences of your actions and for you to, as a player, to think about, well, if I'm frustrated, what action am I going to perform to help relieve that frustration? And what is the social acceptability of that action? Because what I've seen over the years is that the post game frustrating activity is often very much more egregious than what they would do during the match. I mean, players who are frustrated in the middle of the match may not ever think about throwing the paddle, right? But once you've lost that match,
hmm,
then players, for whatever reason, think, oh, it's okay for me to just smash this paddle down or throw it or whatever, because up until now, there hasn't been a lot of consequence for that. The purpose behind this discussion that we're having here is to help you understand, number one, that that type of behavior is never acceptable, that you should find some other alternative to help release your frustration. But then, secondly, there are now going to be potential consequences.
yeah,
So we've talked about uh, language. We've talked about ball abuse. We've talked about paddle throwing. You mentioned briefly the concept of coaching. You can get penalties for coaching as well, or being coached. Now, realize that there's the possibility, there's a potential rule suggestion that may allow coaching outside the rally in 2026. So if you're
we'll
listening to this
see.
in 2026, there's the possibility that what we're saying is different, but you cannot be coached except for during timeouts. And now, as a referee, it's very hard for us to know sometimes whether or not coaching is from a friend directed specifically to you or if it's just random stuff. So, what often will happen, and we haven't talked about this before, but the referee may give a verbal warning to the audience. We hear something that we perceive as being coaching, an actionable statement from the audience that tells somebody to go hit to the weaker player. Um, and we don't know if that's directed to a particular individual. So we will often take a referee timeout and go remind the audience that they can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I've done that before myself, and I've addressed it with individuals myself. One thing we got to hit on here, though, you said coaching is allowed during timeouts. Let's be a little more detailed about that. So it's not just one of the two timeouts that's allowable for each team during a game. It's also at an end change. It could also be in between games. So there are several different times
Types of
that
timeouts. Yep.
types of timeouts that coaching is allowable at this point.
Right.
Yep.
So the referees, we've hopefully you've noticed over the last couple of years that we're getting much more consistent about the phrases that we use in this. We call them scripts that we use. So a referee will use the phrase timeout in a variety of situations. When the player themselves take a timeout, we may do a referee timeout. We may do a medical timeout. We will do an end change when we have to change ends. We'll do that, and also in between the games. All of those we start by saying timeout. And as
Mhm.
Mike said, coaching is all allowed during any one of those situations.
Yep.
All right, we've been talking for quite a while here, Mike. Any last minute stuff that you want to chat about?
No, I think that we've hit on what we wanted to talk about. I hope that we have enabled players to understand what type of penalties they can incur. Understand if you don't have a referee out on your court, you can always ask for somebody to come out to de-escalate something. And then we've also talked about how referees distinguish between what type of level of penalty they should get. So I think we've hit it pretty well,
Right.
Bob.
And more importantly, we realized that Mike is not the only certified referee within USA Pickleball. So,
Not even close. Not even close. So
all
they're
right.
all
Thank
great.
you, everybody. And we will see you in episode 16 that has yet to be determined what the topic is. We will do that at some point, and we'll see you on the courts.
Like us, subscribe to us. Take care.